Listen, that's a word that's loaded with a lot of things, right? When we think about our language module last week, what does this word really mean? Well, Merriam-Webster's dictionary says to pay attention to sound. Okay. To hear something with thoughtful attention, to give consideration. That seems to be a little bit more meaningful, certainly a little more cognitive. To be alert to catch an expected sound. Okay. If I'm sleeping and a baby cries, would it wake me up? But listening is a complex process. We have these communication classes, and listening is usually an afterthought. So I thought, well, I think I'm going to make sure that I keep it in here this time. So, how would you rate yourself as a listener? I will be truthful and say that I consider myself to be an awful listener. And I'll tell you some of the reasons why as we get through some of the barriers to listening. So, what is a barrier to listening? Sometimes it's environmental and physical factors. Maybe it's the way that the furniture is laid out in a room. If you went to a high school that had those long tables in the cafeteria, right? If you couldn't, it was very hard to talk to somebody always out the other end of the table because you couldn't hear them or see them that well, and other people were screaming. Sometimes it's physiological noise. Maybe our ears are all clogged, like when you're sick. Maybe you have a headache. My dad needs to wear his hearing aids. So if those aren't in, he's probably not going to be able to listen very well. Psychological noise. This is just when we're stressed, we're preoccupied with something else. This is a big one for me. You feel like you have 30 browsers open in your head. Cognitive and personal barriers. So maybe you just don't understand the topic, or maybe you're being highly biased about the topic. You're like, I don't even want to listen to anything about that. Don't even talk to me. The rate that we speak versus the rate that we think. Our brains work faster than our mouths, even for those of us who are fast talkers. So our brains are going, and the mouth of the person that's doing the speaking can't work quite as fast. So our brains will sometimes take us too far. You can also have selective attention. This is paying attention to only what benefits us. Now, I always tell students that when you're developing your presentation, you always have to remember for the audience, what's in it for them? Why should they care about what you're talking about? I'm guessing you chose a topic that you care about for the informative presentation, but why should this audience care? Man, we sometimes listen with our answer running, right? How am I going to respond to what they're saying? So I don't even hear half of what they're saying. I'm not listening to them because I'm thinking about how I'm going to respond. Lack of listener preparation. I listen to a lot of students talk about the anatomy and physiology classes, and they seem really hard. And I would guess that if a student were to read the text about what they're going to be talking about in class that day, maybe doing some notes so that they're familiar with some of the terms and concepts before going into that lecture so that they were more prepared for the lecture, the listening might be better and therefore the understanding. And sometimes messages are just bad, right? The content is so hard to follow. Maybe it's disorganized. Maybe it's just bad content. On the flip side, sometimes the speaking quality is just really poor. Someone's really rambling on, or they don't know the content very well. Maybe they're reading to us. Maybe they're really angry and that's really coming out. We don't want to listen to people like that. We all have our own prejudices or biases. We all have them. No getting around it. We're human. And we try to preserve our own way of thinking. So we're not going to be open to new ideas. And this is a real barrier to listening. Now, I will admit this is a real struggle. Okay? There are some ideas that we're just never going to listen to. I have ideas where I'm like, nope, I don't want to hear any of it. But there are lots of things that I might be, not really, but maybe it would be a good idea to listen to it. Sometimes we have distorted listening. This is when we're missing details or we're kind of twisting information that's presented because maybe we're trying to fit it into some preconceived idea we already have. Now, along the same lines, but a little bit more, just to kind of up that a little bit, is the aggressive listening, where you're listening to try to find something wrong so you can attack that speaker. You're just any little slip up and you're going in for the kill. That narcissistic listening, man, you're trying to make the interaction all about you. Maybe you know someone, work with somebody who is like this. Everything always comes back to them. And then there's that pseudo listening. You're acting like you're paying attention, but you're nowhere near that. So how can you be a better listener? Well, there's three different areas: cognitive, your head; emotional, your heart; and behavioral, your body, what you do with that. So cognitively, paying attention to the information you're receiving, saying to your brain, I need you to pay attention to this right now, right? Because this is going to be important, even if it's really hard, even if I'm kind of stressed, even if I'm thinking about something else I'd rather be doing, even if I'm a little bit tired. When we're going to try to attend to that information. Emotional is staying calm, okay? Staying compassionate, being open, right? Not going off into a rage. When I was working at McDonald's, customers, if they were dissatisfied with something, would come in. I need to speak to the manager. And I always knew, right? I had to lower it, because if I met them with the same level of emotion they were coming at me with, that I was just going to escalate the situation. And the last thing is behavioral. How do we convey interest, comprehension? We do this verbally, but we do this mostly non-verbally. In the United States, we eye contact, right? That's not true across the world. But, if we are facing towards the listener, at least, if we're facing, or to the speaker, if we're facing away, clearly that sends a signal that we're not listening. Maybe we're nodding our head. Maybe we're uttering a little response back. Maybe we're answering a question that they ask. So how can the speaker help the listener? Lots of things a speaker can't do, but there are some things you can do. Always think what the audience needs. I think it's reassuring to students to hear that, honest to goodness, this presentation is not about you. And it's not. It's about the people listening to it. Maybe that takes some of the pressure off of you. What do you need to do to help the people who are listening to your presentation? Put yourself in their shoes. Make sure your information is organized and easy to follow. I'll tell you, we're going to learn more about organizing. I have some samples in the course for outlines. Follow those. And then we're going to be learning more about outlining and organizing. Because if your presentation is disorganized, you will lose us before you get very far along. Make sure you use only quality information. If we don't trust your information, we're not going to trust anything else about it. We will just tune you out and start daydreaming about something else. Or worse, judge you very poorly and say, well, you don't know what the heck you're talking about. And that could be even worse. Avoid any use of unfamiliar words or jargon. You don't need to use big words and specific jargon when a simpler term would work. Sometimes if you need to use those words, do make sure you define them. You can put that on a slide and repeat them a little bit. That helps us. Don't give more information than is needed. That's a big problem for me. I just noticed that typo in there right now. I tend to give more information that's needed if you haven't figured that out by now. But keeping things concise. Speak clearly. Slow down. If English is not your first language, it's okay. We will acclimate to your dialect and your accent very quickly. Use vocal variety. It keeps us engaged. Makes it seem conversational. Try to make good eye contact. Even though there's lots of cultural variation, that's an important feature for an American audience. And the last thing, this is so important, please do not read to us. We know when you are reading. Do not read your screen. Do not read whatever you have printed on your paper. Okay, those are just notes to guide you. Make sure you know your information well enough that you do not have to rely on reading. So there's some questions to think about. I'm not going to go through all of these. You could think about these as you are reflecting on the assignment that's in this module. But thinking about this in yourself and your own listening behavior will help to make you a better listener. And the last piece of information I want to give you is where I got this information. Communication in the Real World. This is a Creative Commons. It is an open access book. just like our textbook is, and this is where I got it. So there's a little bit of information about listening. I hope that that helps you as you think to yourself, how could you learn and become a better listener, even just a little bit in some environments.